Well, good morning. My name is Daniela Perry. I serve as the Vice President of the Georgia Chamber Foundation for the Georgia Chamber of Commerce and serve as Secretary for MAX on the Executive Committee. And we are so excited that you were able to join us this morning to hear from Chris Laney. I know it's going to be a great discussion, and so we'll just get right into it. But Chris is from Lightcast, which is a great program and software that really gives you a great picture of what's going on in the workforce. So we're going to turn it over to Chris to hear about some great trends, but really excited, Chris, to hear from you this morning. And Chris also woke up like at the crack of dawn to be with us. So I appreciate the early wake up.
Well, good morning. It is a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. As mentioned, my name is Christopher Laney. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs and Partnerships at Lightcast. And we are located in Moscow, Idaho, northern part of Idaho, where we are in Pacific time zone. But all that means for me is it's Friday and I get to end my day a little bit earlier by waking up early with you. And so I am excited to be here. For those of you not familiar with Lightcast, we are the global leader in labor market analytics, and our goal is to unlock new possibilities in the labor market. And so as part of today's discussion, I'm going to be talking about what these trends look like in the economy, as well as using labor market data to help inform the conversation today. Before we get started into the top trends that I want to talk about when it comes to building a future-ready workforce, I want to talk about some current challenges that we're seeing in the labor market today. For those of you that are familiar with Lightcast and have read some of our studies, we have a study called the Demographic Drought. We're actually going to be releasing a new version of that study in the next couple of months. And it really talks about the labor shortage that we're experiencing right now across the country and honestly globally, which I'm going to touch on a little bit more. Now, we don't have time today for me to jump into all these various challenges that we're seeing in the labor market, but I am going to touch briefly on the first three: population challenges, labor force participation, and foreign-born and immigration. And the reason for that is because it helps inform the conversation as we continue to go on and what we have to do to have a future-ready workforce within your communities. But I don't want to discount these other challenges that are really hard for many communities right now. Some of these areas we've been monitoring for a while. Others, especially coming during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, like opioids and alcohol abuse, we know are having massive effects on our labor force. So as I mentioned, I want to start with a couple of these challenges just to kind of frame our conversation today. So first, I want to talk about population challenges. There are two areas that we want to focus on when we talk about population challenges. One, we do have an aging population. And so between now and 2040, we expect that 8 out of 10 countries globally are just going to expect to slow when it comes to population. And 3 out of 10 are just going to completely outright shrink, mostly in Europe and East Asia. I'm going to show you that here in a second. Now, we in a developed country, we have benefited from immigration and individuals wanting to live in the United States. But we're starting to see that slow in some areas. And we believe over the next 20 years, we're going to see that slow even further. One, because a lot of countries are realizing and recognizing that people are their greatest commodity and they need to keep them. And two, on the global stage, the United States isn't the only country doing some really great work in terms of building their economies. So we do expect net migration to slow by 60% in most of the developed countries over the next 20 years. This here kind of gives you a look at that data. So that gray line by region globally represents what that growth looked like between 2000 and 2020. The red line represents 2020 to 2040. And so you can see here, when we look at North America, we are going to shrink pretty considerably over the next 20 years. So for those of us that are working in businesses, running businesses or organizations, and we're looking at our workforce shortages, this is a huge red alert because we know we're just not going to have more people in our economy. And so we use a word here at Lightcast called sansdemic, which means without people. How do we operate in an economy without enough people to do the work, to do the jobs that we need? The next thing I want to just touch on briefly is labor force participation. Now, for many, many years, when we looked at the health of a local economy, we looked at unemployment as the key indicator for that health. And so we go, oh, low unemployment. We must be doing really well. Well, labor force participation became a new kind of guiding beacon through the pandemic because we had all these individuals that weren't necessarily collecting unemployment, but they were out of the labor force. And so that really started for us to start looking at labor force participation a little bit closely. You can see here in the data that massive drop that took place in March of 2020. Unfortunately, even over the last few years, as our population has grown, we actually have not recovered that same percentage of people that were working in the labor force. So it becomes even more imperative that we work together with our partners and ensure that we provide opportunities for those individuals that are choosing to stay out of the labor force. Now, some might be out of their control for various reasons, but in other instances where childcare or elderly care is playing a role, how do we create strategies around ensuring that they can get those needs met and also have an opportunity to work? An argument for that could be remote work. We did see labor force participation start to grow over the last few years in some instances because of remote work. Remote work gave the availability for some individuals to work from home so that they can take care of kids at the same time and or give them some more flexibility. We also saw a massive rise in individuals with disabilities having the opportunity to work for the first time because they were able to work directly from their house. And we saw that, and we can continue to see that play out in the economy. The statistics always mind-boggling that we have fewer people today collecting unemployment than we did over 50 years ago when our labor force was 102% smaller. So again, when we start to talk about the availability of people to do these jobs, there just is less people. The last thing I want to touch on when it comes to some real challenges is foreign-born and immigration and how it plays out in the labor market. Since 2022, pretty much all gains in the labor market have come from either foreign-born or immigrants coming into the United States. And so when we think about the growth we've experienced in terms of people entering the labor market, most of that has really come from those coming to our country. The reason why this is important here, if you are familiar with like a SWOT analysis, this is our version of a SWOT analysis when it comes to the demographic drought. What we're showing here is essentially in that top left-hand quadrant is those that have a declining working age population, but they have skilled, tech-ready, and innovative individuals that are ready to work. In that top right-hand quadrant where North America lies right now, we have a growing working age population currently, and we also have a tech-ready population. That bottom left-hand quadrant means that they not only have a declining working age population, but they also have some gaps when it comes to skill and being tech-ready. And then that lower opportunity where we have a growing working age population, which the majority of the world sits in right now, but they also have some of those gaps when it comes to tech-ready and skill-ready. So we as a country have to start looking at how we're going to compete on the global stage. And we might need to look to some of these other areas, regions within the globe to be able to help upskill these individuals and hope that we can either encourage them to come to the United States and or use remote work as a value add. The rate of change and disruption we're seeing in our economies is only going to increase. So if you have that sense of uneasiness right now because of what is happening, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that likely is going to continue as we are struggling with these workforce shortages. However, we do believe there are strategies that we can start to work on and align that could alleviate some of those pressures. And so don't be the I'm essentially just providing the news. Don't kill the messenger. What does it mean to be future ready? So today we're going to talk about maintaining a proactive state of awareness and responsiveness to what is happening in the region. And as a result, we're prepared for what's now and what's next in our local economies and, of course, nationally. So what are these 5 steps to building a future ready workforce? So first, I want to talk about tracking emerging trends in skills and starting to identify skill adjacent careers for your workers. So what do I mean by this? So when we start to track skills over time, it's something that Lightcast is very passionate about. We are constantly looking at skills and how skills are evolving. 75% of skills in the most disruptive jobs, 75% of those top 20 skills have changed since 2021. Now we look at this from all the jobs, 32% of the top 20 skills have changed since 2021. We're seeing this play out more prevalently in emerging sectors. So you can see some of these emerging sectors like green jobs, semiconductors because of the CHIPS Act, cybersecurity, and AI. And so as we're looking at how skills are changing even within these emerging sectors, it continues to evolve and change year over year. Now, looking at the Lightcast Skills Disruption Index, this here is looking at selected occupations and how skills are disrupting those occupations. Now, it's at no surprise that we should expect this in maybe some of the tech sectors, like a mobile application developer. But what's more interesting is when we see this happening in non-traditional tech occupations, like a loan officer, a recruiter, sales, or even a warehouse worker. In these areas, we're starting to see skills continuously change over the last few years and what is expected within those occupations. Now we look at the most disruptive occupations based on these index values over the course of the last few years. Once again, we can see some of those tech jobs surface at the top, but we're still seeing areas like pharmacy aide or tax preparer in these areas where have traditionally not been, a huge kind of tech oriented or skills that change more rapidly, but we're seeing skills change in those areas. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that those are tech skills, but it does mean the skills required for those occupations are changing. This framework that we developed as part of some studies that we did on green jobs, this was a framework that we looked at and for us to start referencing, how do we start building out these skill adjacent careers? What does this mean to our talent pipeline? So in the middle there, those are the jobs that need to be filled within that specific sector. But as we start to fan out, we can start to look at what are the type of individuals that might have some associated skills that might align a little bit better with this type of occupation or this field. And so who needs to be upskilled, who needs to be reskilled, and then who is sitting on the outside that is coming into this industry for the first time and needs true education or some sort of training programs to be able to enter that labor force. I'll give a really good example. So when I start to look at some like skill adjacencies, when I look at Lightcast skill data, for example, if I look at the skill of fabrication as an example, when I look at that fabrication, when we look at the data, oftentimes fabrication is aligned to the skill of welding. So if we see someone that has the skill of fabrication but not welding, then we will see that as skills adjacency. So we can say, oh, they have a skill set that's usually required that is associated with this other skill. Can we upskill them to make them a better worker within a specific field? I also don't want to discount, we're talking about skills, but we're also talking about primarily technical skills, specifically for that occupation. We do not want to discount or forget about durable skills that continue to show up in all of the data. Durable skills or essential skills, soft skills, resilient skills, whatever you want to call them. The durable skills framework that was developed by America Succeeds has been a really interesting framework because it takes those top 10 skills and it layers a bunch of other skills that are associated with those skills. I like this framework so much. I actually have it on my desk, this wheel here that I constantly am referring to and looking at. But 7 of the top 10 most requested skills were durable skills. The top 5 durable skills were requested almost 5 times more than the top 5 hard skills, with leadership and communication being at the top of that list. You can see here those top occupations that are requesting at least 1 or 2 durable skills. And so continuously, we have to look at how these skills are being developed. I could go on a whole tangent on durable skills development, but I won't do that for the sake of time and today. But it's so important that we don't discount the importance of these skills when we're developing talent. When we're talking about building a future-ready workforce or future-ready community, I also don't want to discount the important roles that some of these key occupation or industries require to keep a community functioning. I know a lot of times we're always talking about those emerging sectors. How do we get people into green jobs? How do we get people into semiconductors or AI? But to keep our communities functioning, we need people to work in utilities and we need people to work in nursing homes and hospitals and firefighters. You can see here those numbers that are right next to those key occupation groups are the gap right now that we're trying to hire for in the United States. So yes, we need 1 million firefighters and police officers right now. That's job openings right now to meet our need. Nursing care facilities, I mentioned earlier, elderly care was one of those labor market trends that we're monitoring. We are seeing more and more nursing homes close up over the last half a decade, primarily because they just don't have the workforce to meet those needs. So when individuals that are starting to age that don't have a place to go, that means that responsibility is going to fall on most of the time their kids. And so we're seeing elderly care start to rise. But these are key occupation groups that we have to continue to train for and get people in our communities so our communities can be successful. The next area I want to talk about is collaboration and communication with our partners around key labor market trends and insights in our region. Now, to do that, I want to talk about something that Lightcast has been working on. This actually hasn't been published yet. This is brand new. We've been working on this, what we call a future ready workforce scorecard. And these are the key indicators that we believe play a huge role in a community being future ready. So you can see here, future ready demographics. What is the share of population under the age of 35 within your community? And what's the share of foreign-born population? Both key areas to your future growth. Future ready economy. What are the share of jobs that are in tradable sectors? What does that mean? Well, it means that when there's a worker that has a bunch of skills, can those skills jump out of that sector into another sector, making that individual navigate the labor market at a bit more ease? Historical growth and demand for job postings. So what is the rise of job opportunities within that local community? What does employment growth look like in that community? We are seeing over the last year or so, there are still many employers that have these job postings that I would refer to as fake job postings, meaning that they are posting them because they're hoping to continue to get applications, but they're really not hiring for that specific job right now. They just want to have a flow of job applications because they know that there's a worker shortage. So when they're ready to hire, they have people to call on. We also know that the share of workers with a BA or more is really important. We know individuals that have higher education typically can navigate the labor market a little bit easier. Now, that doesn't discount or negate the importance of individuals that are earning certifications, associate's degrees, or specific certs that are specific to an occupation. But in that example, if I was earning an occupation or a certification to be a welder or to be an electrician, what if something happens to that occupation or something happens within that field? It's a little harder to jump into a whole new industry or occupation when you are so focused within that area. So I don't want to discount that's still important, but we just know individuals that with a higher education typically can navigate the labor market a little bit more at ease. Future ready skills is the share of demand for disruptive skills, meaning what are those disruptive skills in a local economy? And do you have a workforce that are already learning or have those skills at hand? And the share of demand for durable skills as well. So based on these metrics, if we rank all the communities in the United States, which we actually did this globally, so there are a few areas outside of the United States that are in the top 10, but in the United States, here are the top 10 communities right now that we believe have a better future-ready workforce. You can see here, Idaho, Utah, Texas, kind of at the top of the list. Washington also has a couple there. And you can see here, Atlanta is at number 60 across the country, which is honestly not too bad when you consider there's over 600 communities across the United States. So that is a very positive thing. One thing that's really fascinating about this, and I was having these conversations over the last couple of days when I was reviewing the Future Ready Workforce Scorecard, is I'm going to talk in a few minutes about another index that we put out called the Talent Attraction Scorecard. We've been doing this for almost a decade now, where we rank every community across the country on whether or not they're doing really well in talent attraction and retention. What's fascinating about this data is when we look at the talent attraction scorecard, Florida, just to the south of you, has been the #1 state in the country for the last couple of years, with nearly 40 communities in the top 100. However, they only have one community in the top 100 when it comes to being future ready. So there is a clear difference between doing well right now in terms of recruitment and retention and what we believe you're going to need to be successful in the next 20, 30, 50 years. And so just something to keep in mind as we're looking at this type of data. As an example, we love this. I love providing best practices. And this here is from the Dallas Chamber of Commerce, focusing on healthcare and IT. Their community partners came together and said, we need to know what data is important to our community when it comes to these two sectors. So because there's so many different types of community stakeholders, they developed a dashboard in partnership with Lightcast on those specific personas and the data related to those personas. So if I work in workforce and economic development, then I'm going to have data in those sectors that are specific to you, or education or policymakers. And so this is a great example. Highly encourage you to check it out as just an example of how you continue to use data to inform your stakeholders. Next, we want to identify businesses that are poised for growth and are a good match for our community. I say good match for our community because sometimes there are businesses that are not necessarily always a good match in our community based on the things that you're trying to accomplish within that community. Now, at Lightcast, we are fortunate enough, we kind of have two divisions. We have a team that just focuses on our enterprise clients, our private clients, and then we have another team that focuses on education, workforce, economic development, government-related type of organizations. I'm fortunate enough to work on that side, but our enterprise team has done a really good job of coming up with their own, what they call the Global Workforce Readiness Score. This is actually assessing a business's ability to be workforce ready. And so these are the specific indicators that we believe that helps a business identify whether or not they are future workforce ready. So occupation risk, disruptive skill gaps that might be within your business, and inflationary factors that could affect your business. So the cost of goods and other things that could go up. The labor pool depth and sustainability within that local area and within your business, and whether or not that if you have an aging population that's looking at retirement, do you have young people that can fill those roles right after? Industry risk, competitive pressure and forecasting, and industry projected growth. Now, when we looked at these key factors, we started to go out and work with businesses and start to give them letter grades based on these key factors. This here is a global manufacturing company that we worked with and gave them a C+. And we gave them a C+ based on these concentration, these areas. And so this gave them an understanding of like, where do we need to focus to have a better future ready workforce within our businesses? Another area that we continuously are monitoring, we have a tool called Gazelle. It's a software product primarily used in economic development to be able to understand what growing companies and what kind of things they're looking for. So what we're looking at here is what companies are looking for AI-related skills, but are not in the tech industry. So Capital One has been really out there looking for individuals with AI skills and trying to hire up, even though they are in banking and not primarily in the tech industry. You can see other areas like Homeland Security and Deloitte. It makes sense that in the tech space like Meta, Amazon, Intel, those are all tech oriented, but it's fascinating that there are organizations that are trying to hire for those skills ahead of some of these tech companies. Next, the importance of aligning education and workforce leaders around these types of conversations to better understand not just the data that someone like Lightcast can provide, but also that qualitative narrative that you and your partners have around a table and conversation. I believe today's webinar is an example of that, where I can have this type of conversation, but my hopes is that you can work with your partners and Max to be able to talk about the challenges that you're facing and what things that need to happen. We've been actively going out around communities across the country to have these types of conversations. This is just an example of one that I was fortunate enough to be part of in Michigan, where we brought together, it was my first time I saw that many community college presidents and workforce organization presidents in the same room discussing the challenges that are facing their state. We have another one coming up in Orlando here in the next month and a half or so. We have one in Ohio happening here. We highly encourage you to get your stakeholders together, convene your stakeholders, and have these important conversations that lead to actual change, not just having the conversation for the sake of conversations. In addition, you want to understand what key sectors are facing serious talent shortages. We have been working with the White House and the Biden-Harris strategy on cybersecurity, and we are required as part of that partnership to provide quarterly updates on what's happening in cybersecurity in the United States. You can see here that our data shows here from the last update, 85% of cybersecurity jobs can be filled with the existing workforce in cybersecurity. 77% of cybersecurity jobs requested 2 years plus of experience also can be filled with existing workers. So once you understand your true labor force in your area, the skills they have, the jobs that they're doing, you can start to align those individuals with key opportunities within your local region. This is an example of that cybersecurity talent gaps. What's fascinating here is while there is a talent gap in cybersecurity, there is actually an oversupply of talent in those entry-level roles. So individuals that are either earning certifications or graduating have the skills to immediately jump into this industry. But unfortunately, we still have a good portion of businesses looking for cybersecurity type individuals that are stating higher qualifications than what's required for that role. Think about all the jobs that we talk about that job postings require a bachelor's degree. They don't really need a bachelor's degree. They need specific skills to meet the demand of the job within that organization. The last thing I want to talk about is how to help businesses find, recruit talent in your region's talent. So we know the battle for talent is becoming more and more prevalent. And, it's interesting because I've been part of community conversations where we've actually brought together all the businesses kind of within the same sector. They are competing for talent, but they're also realizing that they have to work together to try to upscale individuals into the sector that might be locally, or where do we get talent from in other communities that might be a good fit for our community? A lot of industry associations are really playing a role in this space. This is some examples that, I'm going to talk about for just a couple of minutes. So when we look at somewhere like Greensboro, North Carolina, they're net positive in terms of a talent destination, meaning people actually want to move to Greensboro to work and live. However, the talent they are losing, they're losing a lot of that talent within the same state. So that's really interesting to know that they're not necessarily losing to out-of-state communities, because maybe there is a strategy in which they can start to tackle that real challenge of getting people to stay within their community and not move into other parts of the state. This is a way that we look at this. We want to understand, where is talent going? Where, within Atlanta, as an example, I can tell you where the majority of your talent is migrating to and moving to, and by what occupation are they moving to. Could be a scenario, we talk about this often, the brain drain, where individuals are coming to school within our local region, and then once they graduate, they leave. In fact, we just completed a study for the state of Maryland in cybersecurity, where that's a hub for cybersecurity because of a lot of the federal agencies that need cybersecurity related skills. So there's a lot of opportunity, and people do move there, but they are losing over 50% of their talent that are graduating in cybersecurity in the local region, and they're moving out of the area. So they now know they need to put a greater emphasis and focus on what we need to do to retain our graduates right there in the local area. I mentioned this earlier. We were talking about talent attraction and the talent attraction scorecard. This is a study we do every single year around Christmas time, January, December time. It's something that you can download. We rank every county in the entire country, and then, of course, the states, on who is doing the best when it comes to talent attraction and retention. And we have key metrics that really determine why we believe that's a good hub for talent attraction and retention. And so this is an opportunity for you to kind of say, okay, we're actually doing okay at this, or we could be doing better, as well as starting to look to the future on building a future ready workforce. Having a pulse on emerging sectors, again, what does this mean for your community? You need to understand what is growing, what's declining within our industries. I also just want to point out there has been a lot of emphasis and focus on those emerging industries. There's been federal grant dollars that have poured into communities for tech hubs. There's been for the Good Jobs Challenge grants, a lot of opportunity. But I also don't want to discount the importance of those key sectors that really drive our economy and continue to make it hum. And so two thoughts on that. One, yes, you need to continue to focus on healthcare and manufacturing and professional services type industries. But also, if you come to me and tell me that your sector strategy is healthcare in itself, I'm going to tell you that you and 600 other communities have the same sector strategy. So what makes you unique? Why would people come to your community for that specific sector? What comes to mind often is, like aerospace in kind of the Kennedy Space Center area of Florida, where they're really pouring in resources into that one because they feel like that's what makes us unique. That's an opportunity for us to grow. But they're not leaving behind those important sectors like healthcare and IT and other areas that you need to continue to grow. Looking ahead to the occupations and skills that are going to be disrupted. We know the skills you need now. We know the skills employers need right now. But what are the skills that you may need 10 years from now? So looking at skill projections and ensuring that we're working with our training providers to ensure that we're teaching those skills now. One of the things that I've had an opportunity to work with in a couple of states over the last year or so is right now, if I wanted to add a program to be a training program for those of you familiar with workforce development or workforce development boards, for those workforce boards that fund like WIOA related programs, a lot of them are based on demand right now. So if I want to train for a specific occupation, okay, is it in demand? What is the average wages? Yes, let's add that to our training provider list for that occupation. But how does that take into account emerging occupations, emerging sectors? We need to ensure that our training providers are looking forward to the type of jobs that we want to have in our community 10 years from now and start training the labor force now. And that could start as early as K-12. It could start in CTE programs that we're continuously exploring opportunities to expose kids to some of the skills that are going to be required in the future. Knowing your talent pipeline and how it's going to be impacted by demographics and market trends. This goes back to the importance of discussing how is your labor force aging? Do you have a young population that's going to be able to replace those key individuals? What are your policies around foreign-born individuals coming into the communities? And are there opportunities for them as well? Because we're going to need everybody to meet our labor force demands. So it's really important to stay informed by the labor markets that are happening and try to anticipate and adapt to what is going to occur tomorrow. Embracing change is an opportunity, not a threat. At Lightcast, we like to talk about using the right data to prepare accordingly. We're data people, so it's always about having quality data. I mentioned the demographic drought. We're going to be putting out a new report in October. This QR code, you can scan it really fast if you want to sign up to be the first to get that report when it goes out. We highly encourage you to read it, and all the past demographic drought studies are available on our website, so you can definitely take a look at those. With that said, I went through a lot of data in a short amount of time. We'll take this time to ask some questions or answer some questions, if that's okay.
Chris, thank you so much. We got one first question, which was kind of top of mind for me. We've loved our Lightcast subscription. It's been great. If we're looking to kind of access these, is all of this available on y'all's website? Is it public? Could you share a little bit more about like where we can find some of the reports and scorecards and dashboards that you highlighted?
Yeah, so great question. So we do produce usually 1 to 2 months some sort of study that's publicly available for anybody to download. If you go to the Lightcast website, go to resources, you can find a lot of those studies. It could be anything from rural communities. It could be the demographic drought. It could be on skills disruption. A lot of really interesting studies. So yes, you can definitely download that information. If you want to get a little bit more granular into labor market data, obviously that is something that individuals like yourself that have subscriptions and can pull that data on a regular basis have access to. I also want to point out that what's really unique about our studies that we make publicly available, and honestly, our professionals, like our consultants that do this work for local communities, is that we're not just looking at those traditional labor market data. So like in demographic drought, we are talking about things like opioids and alcohol abuse. And so that's not traditional labor market data that you're going to find in Lightcast data sets. We're having to go out and work with healthcare partners, data partners, to be able to get that data and then run an analysis on it. I would argue very similarly, in some of our studies, we pull in K-12 data. Well, we don't have granular K-12 data in our data sets. That's not publicly available. But what we do is we work with communities on, can you tell us how many CTE programs you have? How many graduates did you have? What kind of skills are they learning in those programs? So that we can do an analysis on whether or not they could be part of the supply of talent in the future in specific sectors.
No, I think that's super helpful. So if y'all go to the website, it's in the resources page, but certainly Chris and his team can make sure that, if y'all want some personalized attention in your community, certainly can kind of do a lot of that stuff. I know we got some additional questions. I think you shared early in the slide deck about how migration is expected to slow by 60%. And I think we had a question if you could just dig a little deeper into like what that means and maybe I know you talked about some of the implications, but if you could kind of re-highlight how slowed migration is going to impact us probably from a workforce perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, I mentioned there's only two ways to grow your local population. It's the people that you're making, and we've been under the birth replacement rate for 50 years, and people that are moving into your community. Now, that could be domestically move into your community. So when we talk about talent attraction in that scorecard, the reason why, a state like Florida and even Georgia's in the top 10. I can't remember exactly what number they are, but I'm pretty positive they're in the top 10. People like to move to southern states like Texas and Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, Arizona have been the top of our state rankings for quite a while now. And so you benefit from domestic migration into your state, which is great. It's very difficult to have this conversation when I'm in one of the northern Midwest states and I'm like, well, no one's moving here. And so that's already a challenge. And so that's a benefit. When we talk about immigration, the United States truly has benefited from being one of those countries that people want to live in and they want to work in. And so that has been a benefit. Well, there are other countries now that are also doing some very interesting stuff. Australia has 4 of the top 10 communities when we look at future ready workforce. So when we look at places like Australia, Singapore, Canada, these are actual communities that people want to live in. I would argue I don't want to live in Canada. I'm 3 hours from Canada and it's going to be even colder there. And so that's something that we have to take in mind. The other thing is too, is countries recognize, I mentioned this earlier, recognize that people are their greatest commodity. And so now you're seeing countries that are starting to look at ways where they can keep their talent locally through there's a variety of different approaches to doing that. And so, but they are looking at like, we need to keep our people here locally just to keep our economies running. So we don't want them to move to other countries. And so that's just something that we have to come to terms with, that United States might not be in the top, most likely we'll be always in the top 5 or top 10, but we're not necessarily going to be number 1 all the time when it comes to people wanting to move to our country. There are other countries that people align better with and they might want to move there.
And I think certainly, I know we've been advocating with our congressional delegation about the need for improved immigration policies, to certainly thinking about STEM workers and a lot of high demand fields. So if y'all got good relationships with members of Congress, certainly make sure that they know the importance of attracting talent that's really integral to growing our state.
Can I just one extra point on that? Because you mentioned in those key kind of like higher level kind of occupations and sectors, that is not necessarily the areas where we're needing immigrants. To be clear, when we think about the worker shortages over the last year, any gains that we've made in the labor market in terms of job creation has really only come from 3 sectors: healthcare, hospitality, and kind of that like warehouse transportation area. Those are typically a little bit lower skilled entry level occupations that we are struggling to fill right now. Those sub $20 an hour type occupations is where we're really struggling, because we don't have the young people that are moving into those kind of first job, second job type occupations. And so where we've benefited from has been a lot of the foreign born individuals that are coming into those types of roles that we need just to keep the economy humming. And so a great example of this, we know that there's massive shortages around CNAs specifically. Well, CNAs we know is a kind of a lower skill, lower wage type of role. Well, and I apologize not having the data right off the top of my head in Georgia, but I know in Florida, 49% of CNAs or home health aides are filled by foreign-born individuals. That's nearly half, that's half of those individuals. And so we need foreign-born individuals and immigrants across all sectors, occupations. I think it was in New York, like over 60% of doctors are foreign-born. And so again, it's from lower skilled, low type of skill jobs all the way to those higher skilled, degree oriented jobs. We need people across everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know during COVID, they did have some legislation specifically targeting the healthcare sector. And I know we've had, specific companies that have wanted to do those partnerships. And certainly those are great places to start building your career, finding an opportunity in advance if you want to go back for a credential or a certificate and things like that, which is great upward mobility for folks. We did have a question if you could dig a little deeper into disruptive versus durable skills for folks, just so they have a better understanding of those definitions.
Yeah, so when I mention disruptive skills, those are going to be traditionally technical skills. So think of if I'm a mobile application developer, let's say, and you know, don't quote me on the actual skills, but I'm giving some assumptions and skill examples. So like, let's say a mobile application developer 10 years ago, the primary programming language for that was Java, as an example. And then we see that percentage wise, year over year, Java was 80% the most important skill. Then it's 70%. And so we're seeing a decline within that skill set. I don't know if actual Java is going down in skills. That's just an example I'm using. But then we could see a skill like Python, another programming language, which is, maybe it was 5% in 2015. Now we see that it's 30% in 2020, and then we see it's 40% in 2024. That's an example of more of a technical skill that we're seeing disrupt a specific occupation that is growing pretty significantly percentage wise within a same occupation. And we're seeing other skills decline in their percentage. Durable skills are those traditional, essential, or soft skills. Durable skills is the framework that America Succeeds has really kind of pushed now to be those key communication and leadership and those soft skills across the board that are required that employers continuously ask for. And what I appreciate about the durable skills framework is, like, I'll use communication as an example. Every time I hear communication as a skill set, I think a lot of people think, oh, they have to be like a public speaker. Like that's what they're looking for. No, communication goes far beyond your ability to public speak. It means that I can listen to you. I can process what you're saying, and then I can regurgitate it. The example I like to provide is I remember early days of being in school, and I was in like a tech class, and the teacher asked, hey, tell me your name, the degree you're going after, and something fun, a hobby that you like to do on the weekends. And I watched student after student forget what the teacher asked for, really struggle to be able to respond to those three very simple questions. That's an example of communication skills. I can't imagine being an interviewer or someone that works in HR, and I'm interviewing somebody and I say, can you answer these two questions for me? And they're struggling to answer those two questions. That's an example of like communication. So there's these layers that are within each durable skill that's important to recognize and understand.
And I love that term durable because I think, people have almost kind of keep calling it soft skills. And I think, you're exactly right. Like these are things that you need to be successful in any career at any skill level. It really is something that you've got to have to engage, whether it's collaborating, communicating with your team, making sure you're able to respond effectively to do your job. And so I think that durable term really gets at the fact that these are things that you need to be successful in the kind of workforce and make sure that you're able to remain successful in the workforce.
Yeah, durable skills are in my opinion, they are career defining skills. They are what sets a candidate apart from someone else. If I have two really quality welders sitting in front of me, but one has some of these key durable skills that I'm looking for around communication and character and leadership, that's going to set them apart immediately. What's challenging when we talk about essential skills, soft skills, durable skills, is there's still a question of whose responsibility is it to train those skills. So it always comes up like, is it, is it your parents' responsibility? Is it the K-12 system's responsibility? But then we have a bunch of these kids graduating that are entering post-secondary or the workforce, and they're lacking some of those skills. So is it the employer's responsibility? My argument is that durable skills, if taught right, are they come from life experiences. And so a lot of these skills, you think about fortitude, you think about your communication skills, you think about like having a growth mindset. A lot of that has come from personal experiences where you recognize like, wow, what did I learn in that experience? So we have to start teaching young people that and working through like some of the experiences they had, having that conversation with them and saying, well, what did you learn from that? I can go back and pinpoint times in high school and middle school and go, wow, I learned X because of that skill. So, or that experience.
Yeah, no, I think certainly that's what, companies are looking for, of like, when do I put you on this advancement track? So I think that's a great way to kind of explain it and make sure people have got a good grasp. Um, we do have a question. Is Lightcast seeing any correlation between increased demand for AI and robotic skills by an employer or within an industry, and a decline in overall hiring? So I think, that point of like, is AI and robotics starting to become more important, but we're
Mm,
needing less roles? I think that's consistently what we've always heard about the impact of AI. It's going to
yeah.
be more important, but you're going to need fewer people to do some of those roles. Um,
Yeah, I think that's, oh, sorry, go ahead. Is there more to
the
that question?
second part to that question, from Nye, is any thoughts on what extent AI robotics can have on solving some of those talent shortages that we see, especially, and I think some of those, industries and fields that are always hard to fill.
Yeah, great question. Pretty weighted. So I'll do my best to keep it focused. So about 10 years ago, the flags were going off, the red alerts, like we're gonna have all these people that are gonna be displaced because of AI and automation. And as you know, over the last 5 years, what we've seen is that has not actually occurred, or we still have massive worker shortages, right? So we need AI and we need automation and we need robotics just to keep up with production in the United States. So we need to continuously innovate and evolve within our communities so that we can try to keep up with production because we don't have enough people to do the work anyway, right? So I'm not worried about AI replacing a bunch of jobs, because we're going to need those same people to get reskilled and get into another job because there's so much of a need within our community. So is it if we have someone that's in a production worker making $18 an hour, we then do some sort of automation and then that person is not needed anymore. Okay, I need them somewhere else and they might even make more money. We can reskill them, get them some certifications, and then they can make $25 an hour. Like that's how I perceive that. Now, with that said, we are monitoring the fact that there are key occupation groups that are going to be affected by AI more than others. This is also a concern because, and some of the research we've done, out of like the top 20 occupations that AI is most likely to affect, over 70% of those occupations are held by women specifically. And so one thing what we don't want to do is start to create some issues where we're now displacing a specific gender or a specific age group or something along those lines. So we need to ensure that we're telling everyone across the board that, hey, these skills could disrupt this occupation. Like there are other occupations when we're talking about equity, we talk about that a lot in terms of occupation equity, where we know there are specific industries and occupations that are predominantly held more by women than men. And so we want to create a more equitable solution based on age, gender, race, and those are things that we're constantly looking at. And so yes, AI is going to displace some occupations. We still need the people. So we need to understand what occupations could be affected, and we need to see who's in those occupations, and we need to start rescaling those individuals for the occupations that we need help with.
I think that's a great segue to the next question, because it really talks about using data to be intentional and make sure that you're really making strong decisions and thinking about what programs do you start implementing at your company or within your community. But wondered if you could kind of share a little bit more about, Some of those really productive strategies that y'all see in making data-driven decisions on those emerging industries and
Yeah.
occupations. It's always hard to know what's always going to shake out at the end of the day, and knowing that with a lot of data that is publicly available, it lags a little bit. And so how are y'all, what kind of advice do you give to folks about how to manage that?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a big fan of both traditional and real-time labor market data. So like, yes, there's a lag in some of the data we see, especially in education data that's usually a year behind. Census data is a year or two behind. But your traditional labor market data is usually a quarter behind. So that's, pretty realistic. Where you look at job postings and what we call online resumes or profile data, that's in pretty close to real time. And so you can be looking at some of those trends in the local area. I want to give you a couple of examples, I guess, in terms of using data. I mentioned before, like, looking at skill progressions. And so you can go through using Lightcast data. It takes some finessing, but you can go through and look at the percentage of skills that are rapidly growing over the course of the next 2 to 5 to 10 years. And so then that providing that information with training providers and saying, hey, you may have a program that you're training right now. We don't want you to change the program. Like, the occupation is still, we need that occupation, but the skills within that program are changing a bit, and they need to be aware of it. Like, I took a social media marketing class in like 20, I don't know, it's 2010, 2012, whatever, and they were teaching me MySpace skills. MySpace was long gone by then, but that professor, clearly it was on cruise mode at that point. And so it was kind of a disappointing class. I think I finished it in like 3 days, because it was like an online class. And so that's an example of, we have to ensure that we are training to the skills that are most prevalent now and in the future. That's one example of how to use kind of data to inform. The other thing too, this is kind of in a larger scale way, a project that we've been working on with the state of Indiana. I think it's one of the more innovative projects. They have a methodology that directs their state funding to CTE programs, to either ETPL and workforce dollars, adult ed, just a variety of initiatives they have in the state. Well, that methodology, again, was fully based on what's in demand now and wasn't taken into effect emerging occupations and industries and skills related to those occupations and industries. So Lightcast, over the last year, had to work on a new model, a new methodology for how they're directing that funding. And so that was using data insights, and we built this kind of elaborate dashboard where it ranks occupations based on a variety of indicators that you can kind of move based on the persona. So if I'm in economic development or workforce development or education, then I can kind of move the model around to then relayer those top occupations to focus on. So that's really important, because that's both in real time, but it's taken into account like historic trends, future, projections, things of that nature. So that's a way of using kind of labor market data that is informing how they're going to spend over $160 million in that state for future programming. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can look at data, sector specific data, kind of the overall arching, how we help our education partners. And then also, lastly, is just ensuring that you're providing data to your job seekers. Like, it is a requirement for workforce boards to provide that information. But if someone walks into my, into like an American Job Center, for example, and they say, I need a new job. Well, we can't just rely on the grant dollars we received and said, oh, I got this $100,000 grant for healthcare, so I'm going to put them in healthcare. No, we need to assess them, make sure that they are a good fit for healthcare, show them the opportunities that exist within healthcare so that they're making a better, more informed decision. When we create career pathways, there's been this belief that, like, okay, I'm going to become a CNA, and then I'm going to become an LPN, and then I'm going to become an RN. Like, that's the career pathway. That actually doesn't occur in the labor market. That's actually really rare. What we find is people that choose to become CNAs, almost 50% of those CNAs leave that occupation within 12 months, because it's a lower wage and it's a hard job. You have to be passionate about that kind of work to want to stay in it. And so that's just an example of how we're using labor market data to be able to understand where job seekers should consider their focus and their careers.
Absolutely. And we have one kind of follow-up to that was kind of what's your advice too on maybe some of those new and emerging careers that don't always have like good like SOC codes. I know clean tech is an area that we're looking in. It's hard to get
Mhm.
good data because there's such new fields, or I think drone pilots was the one. So any advice there on kind of how to manage that too?
Yeah, great question. Comes up a lot. So we at Lightcast in the last couple of years, we've developed new taxonomies. We have a sector taxonomy, we have an occupation taxonomy that lives outside of the traditional SOC or NACE codes. And the reason for that is because the government is just trying to catch up with some of those emerging occupations and industries. Now, we still highly believe in SOC taxonomy and the NACE taxonomy, and we know that how relevant and important they are to communities. But when we look at cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, the green energy or green jobs, those are what we consider lightcast sectors. So in our data sets, you can go in and click one of those lightcast sectors to be able to look specifically at that sector to better understand it. And we're growing that. There's not tons of lightcast sectors. Those are just those four that I just kind of mentioned. Those are like I think we have a half a dozen. So we're continuously building those out because it takes a lot of work to model and understand the occupations that align to that specific sector. And so same thing with the Lightcast occupation taxonomy. Think about like a job posting, or think about a person that's in a programming type of role and their job title is programming ninja. Like that's like an example that we have seen that we're like, okay, what does that actually mean? And so then we have to align skills, put it into a job normalization taxonomy, so that we understand the type of roles that are actually out there in the real economy.
Well, and we so appreciate y'all taking that extra layer of care to make sure we've got really good data and able to make really good decisions. But Chris, I'm so grateful for your time this morning and sharing all the information with us. We'll make sure to share the deck and your contact information if that's okay, so
Yep.
that folks can connect and continue to think about how they can partner with y'all and use your resources.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity today. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
We're just going to walk through just a couple slides real quick as we wrap up. So just want to make sure everyone is able to save the date for our annual meeting. It's going to be at the Metro Atlanta Chamber on December 10th from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And now we'd really like to share a little bit about a new program that we are rolling out this year. Our application is currently open. You can use this QR code to access it. But this is a great program all about kind of developing leaders within our workforce development community. So I would say if you are an emerging leader or if you are growing and you're looking to grow in the workforce development community, we're going to have great programming, really equipping you to be more effective in your role, and then developing a community of peer leaders that you can continue to bounce ideas off and solve problems with, because we know workforce is all about problem solving and collaborating. So this is the QR code, and I'm sure you'll continue to see more from Joy and from Max about this. But if you've got someone in your organization that you think would be a great fit, we'd love for you to think about applying. And certainly, if you've got questions, you can feel free to reach out to me or some others. Again, a special thank you to our anchor investors. We could not do our programming without them. I appreciate, again, everyone joining this morning. Hope you all have a great Friday, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks.